to my channel. In today's video I'll be talking about apoptosis. Okay, so let me begin by explaining cell injury and cell death. Cell injury occurs when the cell is no longer able to adapt. So inability of a cell to adapt to increasing physiological demands or a pathological stimuli will result in cell injury. And there are two types of cell injury: the reversible cell injury and the irreversible cell injury. In the reversible cell injury, the cell will return to its normal state after the injurious stimuli have been removed. Whereas in irreversible cell injury, the cell reaches to a point of no return and dies. So that is cell death. Irreversible cell injury will result in cell death. And there are two patterns of cell death: necrosis and apoptosis. Necrosis, I've talked about necrosis, the definition of necrosis and the different types of necrosis. So today we'll be talking about apoptosis. The link to my video on necrosis will be in the description box. I'll also put in the links to my other videos that I've made in the description box so that you'll be able to understand this topic very well. Okay, so let's begin. Apoptosis is a form of cell death. Like I said, there are two patterns of cell death: necrosis and apoptosis. So apoptosis is a form of cell death that is designed to eliminate unwanted host cells through activation of a coordinated, internally programmed series of events brought about by a set of gene products. Apoptosis is also known as programmed cell death, and it is seen in several important physiological as well as pathological processes, some of which include embryogenesis. Embryogenesis is the development of an embryo within the uterus, and organogenesis, the development of organs in the embryo. Also, apoptosis is seen in the death of neutrophils during acute inflammatory response. It's also seen in hormone-dependent physiological involution of the uterus. It's also seen in cell deletion in proliferating populations such as intestinal crypt epithelium or cell death in tumors. Okay, so now let's look at the morphological features of apoptosis. It usually involves single cells or small clusters of cells. And the first morphological feature seen in a cell undergoing apoptosis is cell shrinkage. In necrosis, there are early changes in the mitochondrial shape and function. The cell loses its ability to regulate osmotic pressure, swells and ruptures. So the contents of the cell are spilled into the surrounding tissue, resulting in generation of local inflammatory response. And so necrosis is the consequence of a passive and degenerative process, while apoptosis is a consequence of an active process. Cells that are undergoing apoptosis they often fragment into membrane-bound apoptotic bodies that are readily phagocytosed by macrophages or neighboring cells without generating inflammatory response. So unlike cells that are undergoing necrosis that will rupture and the contents of the cell will be spilled into the surrounding tissue, resulting in the generation of local inflammatory response, cells that are undergoing apoptosis fragment into membrane-bound apoptotic bodies and are readily phagocytosed by macrophages or neighboring cells without generating any inflammatory response. So the morphological features seen in cells undergoing apoptosis are as follows. First, the cell shrinks and becomes smaller in size. Then the nuclear chromatin is condensed and aggregates peripherally under the nuclear membrane into well-defined dense masses of various shapes and sizes. And then in the cytoplasm, there is formation of cytoplasmic blebs or buds and apoptotic bodies. And next is the phagocytosis of apoptotic cells or bodies by nearby healthy cells or macrophages. So the cell as a whole first shrinks. Next, the nuclear chromatin within the nucleus will condense and aggregate peripherally under the nuclear membrane. Then in the cytoplasma, you see cytoplasmic blebs or buds and apoptotic bodies. Yeah. And next, this cell fragments into membrane-bound apoptotic bodies that are readily phagocytosed by macrophages or neighboring cells without generating any inflammatory response. Remember, that is very important. One of the major differences between necrosis and apoptosis. Okay, so now I've talked about the morphological features of apoptosis, and then we've defined apoptosis. Now let's go over to the differences between apoptosis and necrosis. I've already mentioned one. In apoptosis, there is no inflammatory response, whereas in necrosis there is inflammation. In apoptosis, the apoptotic bodies, which fragments, are readily phagocytosed by macrophages or nearby healthy cells. And then another difference between apoptosis and necrosis is the stimuli. For apoptosis, it is stimulated mainly by physiological and pathological factors. In necrosis, severe and sudden injury such as ischemia, physical and chemical trauma stimulates necrosis. Another difference, microscopic appearance. When you view a cell that is undergoing apoptosis under the microscope, you see condensation of the nuclear chromatin, and then you also see apoptotic bodies. Whereas when you view a cell that is undergoing necrosis under the microscope, you see cell swelling and disruption of organelles within the cytoplasm. The organelles within the cytoplasm are disrupted. Another difference, DNA breakdown. For apoptosis, the DNA breakdown is internucleosomal, whereas for necrosis, the DNA breakdown is random and diffuse. The next difference, the mechanism of apoptosis. The mechanism of the two process. For apoptosis, the mechanism is by gene activation, endonucleases, and proteases, whereas in necrosis, the mechanism ATP depletion, membrane injury, and free radical damage. Okay guys, that's it for today's video. Don't forget that apoptosis is a form of cell death that is designed to eliminate unwanted host cells through activation of a coordinated, internally programmed series of events brought about by a set of gene products. So apoptosis is a coordinated event and is also known as programmed cell death, unlike necrosis, which refers to a sequence of morphological changes that follow cell death in living tissue or organ. Apoptosis do not generate inflammatory response. The apoptotic bodies the apoptotic cell fragments into apoptotic bodies which are readily phagocytosed by macrophages or healthy cells around it. Whereas in necrosis, the cell will swell, rupture, and release the contents of the cell in the surrounding environment, which generates inflammation. Oh, okay guys, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon so you don't miss my next video. Also like and share this video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.